John had been out of work for 6 months, his savings dwindling, his hope fading. The economy was in the dumps, and the job market was a desert. So when he saw the help wanted sign in the window of the 7-Eleven, he didn't think twice. He stepped inside, the bell chiming a greeting as the door swung open. The smell of stale coffee and cinnamon rolls filled his nose, and the fluorescent lights flickered in a way that made his skin crawl. The manager looked him over with a skeptical eye. "You're here about the night shift?" John nodded, trying to hide his desperation. "Look, pal," the man said, leaning heavily on the counter. "It's not your typical gig. There's some stuff that goes on around here that, well, let's just say it's not for everyone. You're gonna see things. Strange things. You gotta keep your cool, no matter what." John's curiosity was piqued, but he needed the work. "I can handle it," he said with a confidence he didn't quite feel. The manager handed him a thick binder, the cover emblazoned with the words, 7-Eleven Night Shift Protocol. "Read this," he said. "And if you still want the job, come back tomorrow at midnight. You'll find out what you're really signing up for." John took the binder and left the store, the cool night air a stark contrast to the stale warmth he'd just escaped. As he flipped through the pages, his eyes widened at the sheer number of rules and regulations. No talking to customers after 2 a.m. No leaving the store without permission, even for emergencies. Always keep the lights on, no matter how much you want to save on the electric bill. And the most curious of all, if you hear a knock on the freezer door, do not acknowledge it. Do not, under any circumstances, open it. He thought it was a joke at first, some kind of hazing ritual for the new guy. But as he read on, the tone grew darker, the implications more dire. The manual spoke of the other patrons, who only came out at night, and the things that needed to stay behind the freezer door. It was like nothing he'd ever encountered before. The next evening, John returned to the 7-Eleven, his heart racing as the clock ticked closer to midnight. The parking lot was empty, the street lamps casting eerie shadows across the pavement. He pushed the door open, the bell chiming a foreboding welcome. The manager looked up, nodded once, and handed him his name tag. "You read the book?" he asked. John nodded, the binder heavy in his back pocket. "Good. You're hired." John's first few nights were uneventful. He stocked shelves, restocked the hot dog roller, and brewed endless pots of coffee that no one seemed to buy. The quiet was eerie, but he grew used to it, the rhythm of the night lulling him into a sense of security. The customers who did come in were the usual late-night stragglers, college kids, night owls, and the occasional insomniac. He kept his head down, his eyes on the clock, and the freezer door firmly in his periphery. But as the week progressed, things grew stranger. The shadows danced in the corner of his eye when he was sure no one was there. The sound of shuffling footsteps echoed in the aisles when the floor was empty. And every night, at exactly 2:37 a.m., the freezer door would shiver as if something had gently brushed against it from the inside. John's hands would sweat, his heart racing, but he'd remind himself of rule number 1, no talking to customers after 2 a.m. So he'd swipe his cloth over the already clean counter and pretend he hadn't heard a thing. The knocking grew more insistent, a steady tap 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 that seemed to say, "Let me out." But he knew better. He'd read the manual. Then came the night when the knocking grew too loud to ignore. The sound reverberated through the store, echoing off the walls and making the glass on the cooler doors rattle. John's hands trembled as he clutched the binder to his chest, the plastic of the name tag digging into his skin. His eyes darted around the store, searching for anything that could explain it. But the aisles were empty, the security camera feeds showing no signs of movement. Taking a deep breath, he approached the freezer, the air growing colder as he drew near. The knocking grew louder, more demanding. He could feel something on the other side, something desperate to get out. His hand hovered over the handle, the cold metal beckoning. He knew he shouldn't, but the curiosity was too great, the need to know too overwhelming. And that was when the rules stopped being just words on a page. That was when the 7-Eleven night shift became something more. John's hand was just about to touch the freezer handle when a sudden, piercing screech filled the store. The lights flickered violently, and the sound of the knocking stopped abruptly. He spun around, the silence deafening in its immediacy. The lights steadied, but the cold remained, a palpable force that clung to him. He knew he'd made a mistake, one that could cost him more than his sanity. He glanced at the clock. It was 2:38 a.m. The witching hour had passed, but the rules were clear: no leaving the store without permission. His eyes darted to the security monitors, expecting to see something, anything that could explain the noise. But the screens remained dark, the power to them apparently drained. His breath came in shallow gasps, and his pulse was a drumline in his ears. John knew he had to get out, had to tell someone about the knocking, but the fear rooted him to the spot. The manual had warned him about the consequences of breaking protocol, but it had never prepared him for this. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, the screen illuminating his panic-stricken face. No signal. No way to call for help. With a deep breath, he pushed the fear aside and approached the freezer again, the quiet now a suffocating weight. The handle was cold, colder than it should have been, and as he turned it, a blast of frigid air hit him, sending a shiver down his spine. The freezer door swung open with an eerie creak, revealing rows of frozen foods and a wall of thick, misty condensation. But there, in the back, was something that didn't belong. A hand. It was pale and slender, the fingers tipped with sharp claws that glinted in the weak light. The nails were caked with what looked like frost, and it reached out to him, beckoning. John felt his body move on its own accord, his hand reaching back, the cold of the metal handle forgotten. But just as he was about to touch it, the lights in the store flickered back to life, the knocking starting again. The hand retreated, disappearing into the mist as the door slammed shut with a bang that made him jump. The cold receded, leaving him standing in the now well-lit aisle, his heart racing, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. The night grew longer, the knocks more persistent. John knew he had to make a choice. Follow the rules or face the unknown. And as the clock ticked closer to 4 a.m., the knocking grew so loud that it seemed to shake the very foundation of the store. He couldn't take it anymore. He had to know what was behind that door. With trembling hands, John reached into his pocket and pulled out the binder. He flipped through the pages, his eyes searching for any clue, any loophole that would allow him to open the freezer without inviting whatever was in there into the world of the living. But the manual remained frustratingly silent on the matter of what happened when the rules were broken. The knocking grew louder still, and he felt a strange pull towards the freezer. It was as if the very fabric of reality was begging him to open it. He took a step closer, his hand shaking so badly that the binder nearly slipped from his grasp. The hand inside was definitely there, he could see the faint outline through the condensation. It was a part of something larger, something trapped. Against his better judgment, John reached out and touched the cold metal of the freezer door handle. The knocking grew quiet for a moment, and the hand inside retreated slightly, as if sensing his hesitation. But the silence was shattered by the sound of the store's phone ringing, jolting him out of his trance. It was the manager. "John," he said, his voice gruff with sleep. "What's going on down there?" John swallowed hard, his heart racing. I think I heard something." "Listen to me very carefully," the manager said, his tone serious. "Do not open that door. No matter what happens, do not open the freezer. Do you understand?" John nodded, even though the manager couldn't see him. "Yes, I understand." "Good. Stick to the protocol, and you'll make it through the night." The line went dead, and John was left with his thoughts and the ominous knocking that had now resumed. The hand was back, the claws scratching at the door, the cold emanating from the freezer like a malevolent fog. But he had made his decision. He was going to ignore the manual and find out what was happening. With a deep breath, John grabbed the handle and yanked the door open. The mist rushed out, and with it came the most horrifying sight he had ever laid eyes on. A creature, half human, half ice, with eyes that burned like blue flames, stared back at him. It was bound in chains that rattled with every movement it made, the source of the knocking all along. The creature's skin was a sickly pale blue, cracked and frozen in places, with hair made of icicles that clinked together as it moved. It snarled at him, revealing rows of sharp, frosty teeth. John took a step back, the freezer's cold air enveloping him like a vice. "Who dares disturb my slumber?" the creature's voice boomed through the store, making the shelves rattle and the drinks in the cooler vibrate. The words echoed in his head, and he realized with a start that the creature had not actually spoken. It was communicating telepathically. John's mind raced. He knew he had to get rid of it, but how? The manual had not prepared him for this. He thought of the rules, the warnings, and the unspoken terror that lay within those pages. He had to find a way to survive, to close the door, and to somehow fix the mess he had created. The creature took a step closer, the chains tightening, holding it back. "You are not like the others," it said, the voice now a hiss in his head. "You have the scent of the one who bound me here. Tell me, are you the one who will release me?" John's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about," he lied, his voice shaking. The creature's gaze grew intense, searching his soul. "You carry the book," it said, and John realized with a jolt that it could see the binder still clutched to his chest. "You know the rules. You know the price." John took a step back, his hand fumbling for the emergency button hidden under the counter. The creature lunged, the chains going taut, and John slammed the freezer door shut with all his might. The cold air retreated, leaving him panting and sweating in the sudden warmth of the store. He locked the freezer, his hands shaking, and called the manager, his voice barely above a whisper. "You need to come in. Now." The manager's response was immediate and curt. "Do not open that door again, John. Under any circumstances. I'm on my way." John waited, his eyes glued to the freezer, the creature's furious pounding and telepathic screams echoing in his head. He had no idea what was coming next, but he knew it was going to be a long, cold night. The minutes ticked by, the clock seemingly frozen in time. The only sound in the store was the persistent thumping from the freezer and the occasional ding of the bell as someone came in for a midnight snack, blissfully unaware of the horror that was just a swinging door away. Each time the door opened, John flinched, expecting the creature to break free and wreak havoc. But it never did. The chains held, and the freezer remained shut. The pounding grew less frequent, and eventually, the creature fell silent. The silence was almost worse than the noise, filling the 7-Eleven with a tension that could be sliced with a knife. The manager arrived at 5 a.m., looking as if he hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale, and he carried a duffel bag that clinked with every step he took. Without a word, he handed John a set of earplugs and a flask. "You're gonna need these," he said, his voice low and serious. John took them gratefully, his curiosity about the flask piqued. The manager saw his look and smiled grimly. "Not for drinking. It's filled with holy water. Spray it on anything that tries to get out." John nodded, his hands shaking as he slipped the earplugs in. The sound of the creature's rage was muffled, but he could still feel the vibrations through the floor. The manager walked over to the freezer and unlocked it, his movements deliberate and slow. The door swung open, and John braced himself for the onslaught. But nothing happened. The creature was there, hunched and defeated, the chains around its wrists thick with ice. It looked up at them with those burning eyes, and for a moment, John thought he saw a flicker of disappointment. The manager stepped into the freezer, and John followed, his eyes wide with fear and fascination. The air was colder than any winter's night, the mist so thick it was hard to see. The manager pulled out a small metal box and opened it, revealing a set of ancient-looking runes etched into the lid. "You have to read these," he told John. It's the only way to keep it bound. John stared at the runes, his mind racing. He didn't know what they meant, but he knew he had to try. He took the box and recited the symbols as best as he could, his voice shaking as he did so. The creature hissed and writhed, the chains groaning under the strain. As the sun began to rise, the creature's movements grew weaker, its form less defined. The manager nodded. Good. It's almost dawn. It won't be able to hold on much longer. John continued to chant, his voice growing stronger with each word. The creature let out one final, desperate scream before collapsing into a pile of shattered ice and frost. The chains clattered to the ground, and the freezer door swung shut with a finality that made John's heart skip a beat. The manager patted him on the back. You did good, kid. Welcome to the night shift. John looked around the store, the normality of it all seemingly at odds with the horror he'd just experienced. He knew he'd never see the 7-Eleven the same way again. The night shift wasn't just about restocking shelves and serving coffee, it was about keeping the balance between worlds, about keeping the things that go bump in the night exactly where they belonged. And as the sun crept in through the windows, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor, John realized that he was now part of that world. A guardian of the night, bound by the chilling protocol that kept the darkness at bay. He took a deep breath, the chill of the freezer still clinging to his bones, and prepared for the next shift, ready to face whatever the night had in store for him.